got barbecue back there, and you didn't invite me. Hurt my feelings.
Welcome back to another Destination Dynasty quick hit episode talking through draft pick war. If you missed part one, check it out on the channel, like and subscribe. Hit me up in the comments if there's more questions than answers, and let me know what else you want me to talk about regarding this series. This is going to be a multi-part series talking through the value of your 2025 Dynasty rookie picks relative to historical NFL draft trends and the war in your specific league. If you haven't already, ddfantasyfootball.com. That's what you see up on the screen. I am looking through the roster construction series format, a 12-team Superflex start 11 with 1.75 tight end premium. So you can mimic that league by just typing in my username, Charles Chill FFB, into the war tool. I have the league in there you can select, or you can just create one on Sleeper. And all you have to do is add a third receiver, make it 11 starters, and change the tight end premium to 1.75. But this is what it looked like last year in war per game. So this is 2024, and you can scroll through and you can hover over and you can look at where each player ranked in war at each position. And if you scroll down, you can see the same thing for total war. So above was war per game. This is total war for the season. Obviously, something very important to talk about, which we will talk through with the position series here going forward, is the only way to capture war in a lineup league is to put it in your lineup, meaning you are going to have positive war that doesn't make your lineup. I did a bunch of podcasts during the 2024 season on the DD radio feed talking about this, talking about how some players had such a wide variance of what you actually got from them. Receivers especially, tight ends especially. If you didn't start them, you don't capture their war. I mean, you can look at, one thing you can do is you can remove each position and look at some of these tight ends. Let's take a look at tight end from last year. Total war. If you look at tight ends in this range, let's go tight end 15, Taysom Hill. That's a great example. I didn't even choose him on purpose, but there he is. Tight end 15 in total war. But if you dive deeper into Taysom Hill's game log, there's only a couple times you would have ever even played him. And majority of his 0.5 war for the season was in those games. If you didn't play him during those games, he was really a roster clogger player to you. And there's some opportunity cost with, well, if I didn't do anything with him, but somebody else would have even given me a 4th round pick and a roster spot, but I didn't capture that war, then he's actually a detriment to my team. Because now, obviously, he's injured. He's going to be on a different team. He's not an asset. So it really just bogged down a roster spot and you didn't capture the war. I mean, that's the story with using war, is there's a second element that you still have to get it into your lineup to actually realize a lot of these numbers. Go down. Here's the 3-year war average. So this is what the distribution looks like over the last 3 years. And what we're going to talk about today is draft pick war. This is great to look historically at trends. I think this is very sticky. Meaning this is the 3-year average for this format, so 2022 to 2024. It's a very good bet that the overall distribution of war is going to look like this again. Maybe it's slightly higher or lower at one of these positions in a given year. Maybe the line looks a little different. Maybe it's a little steeper at the top if you have a couple more elite guys and then there's a bigger drop off to the rest. But generally, using a 3-year rolling average, this is what the distribution is going to look like in your league. So now it's about understanding that distribution and then understanding, how do I construct my team to take advantage of this is something that's going to happen. So how do I embrace, not up here, because up here, let's be honest, you could almost cut this part off of the graph for all the positions. This is all your elite players. Largely, those guys' war are going to be captured 100%. If you have Trey McBride, you're starting him every week. Unless he's injured or extremely bad run of time where he goes 4 games without getting a catch or something crazy, you're going to capture all of this war up here. And because you're starting these guys 100% of the time across the season, if they fall in this range, you're going to capture it. Where leagues are won or lost is really in this range, right in here. This is the range of guys where you're going, I don't know who to start as my 4th receiver, or, my 5th receiver in my flex, or I don't know what RB2 to start. I only want to start one. I don't want to flex a plotting, touchdown reliant running back, but I have to pick between 3 of them on a given week. One of those guys could score 2 touchdowns and they end up with 0.1 WAR for the week, and you didn't start him. And that might be one of 2 or 3 times you could have started that running back and you didn't capture that big game. This is where a lot of leagues are lost and won based on your lineup decisions. When you get down here, you're starting to get into, okay, what positions down here are going to be most useful to carry on my bench for the 1 or 2 times a year where I'd consider playing them. That's where you're starting to get into your bench and your roster construction. We'll talk about that when we go through each position relative to this draft. But let me bring this up. So I shared this a little bit last show at the very, very end, kind of teased what the draft pick war looks like using a 2-year average. And this is from the 2019 through 23 classes. So 2024 is not included because I only have 1 year sample size, but this is using ADP from 2019 to 2023, and then just looking at the trend of what those picks produced. 2-year war. So this is each player at these spots. So at these spots at the 101, 2, 3, all the way down to the 212, and what those players gave you on a 2-year war window. So the first 2 years of their career, what did these players produce from a war perspective? And as you can see, there becomes a point where it drops below 0 down here, right there, about the 208. It drops below 0. Now, what's the first thing when you see it go below 0? This is still actual war, not in your lineup, actual war. So that's the first thing that stood out to me when I look at this is right at that 208 range. Like the expectation after that is a negative war player. Now, remember, negative war doesn't mean the player never was useful. It just means that a lot of players in that range or below didn't actually get opportunity to get positive war every single week. They might have been a running back that only got a couple starts. They might have been a quarterback that was a backup and only got a couple starts. They might have been a receiver that wasn't a top 2 receiver on their depth chart. So they had a couple games here and there, but largely we would classify them as a roster clogger because of how they were scoring their points. So it's just very interesting to see that drop off, and that's for 2 years. So if you're negative on average for 2 years, just think about that. Kind of tells me there's a cutoff somewhere in the second round of where I'm even expected to get positive production. And again, I want to reiterate, it doesn't mean that because a player had negative war for 2 years or expected negative war for their first 2 years, they were never useful one single week. They just weren't useful that often because their war was negative a lot of weeks, right? Their war was they RB 52 in a week. You might get 3 touches. Think like Kenneth Gainwell's career. He's the perfect guy where he ended up with a lot of games where he gets 5 touches, 8 touches, 6 touches. He's averaging like 6.9 opportunities a game for his career. That's a lot of negative war weeks. But he wasn't a complete zero. If there would have been a week or 2 in there where you said, hey, I can expect him to get 15 opportunities this week, you could start him. But he's going to rack up a ton of negative war weeks. Same with a receiver that's the 4th receiver on their team. They get some catches. Maybe across the season, they give you 45 catches. But then you look at the distribution of those over a 17-game season, a lot of negative war weeks, a lot of wide receiver 60, wide receiver 70, wide receiver 50 on the week. They don't help you, though. If you put those in your lineup, you actually captured the negative war. We don't capture negative war a lot because generally we know not to start players that are going to get negative war. But that's why I said that range in the middle, like the flex ranges, I'll go back and share it for everybody so you can see it. This range is so important. This is where all your lineup decisions are coming. And if you end up with a lot more guys capturing, and again, a guy that's down in this range, if you're putting up running back 30 war on the year, you probably had a lot of games where you were not useful at all, and a lot of games where you were probably up in RB2 range. When were you started? Did I start the good ones, bench the bad ones? What combination of that probably determines where you fall on this curve for the season. So back to the 2-year aggregate. Take a look at this again. And now I'm going to break it down war per game. from these slots. I think people are a lot more interested in this, and this is something that I've talked about with War a ton, and I'm going to be talking about it more over the next couple months. We look at a lot of these things on 3-year averages, or this is the War for the year, or the first 10 minutes of the show, I've talked about yearly trends, 2-year trends, which is what you see on the screen. But we play a week-to-week game. Fantasy football is a week-to-week decision game. Yet we measure a lot of stuff by, well, this was his point per game average for the year. This was his total WAR for the year. But the game is played in 1-week increments. We make 11 lineup decisions in a league like this every week. And if you look at your entire 17-week fantasy season, and you look at the fact that you're making 11 lineup decisions a week, right there, you are only making 187 decisions a season in this league. Think about that. You're only making 187 decisions a season in this league, and probably 80% of those are already made for you. Maybe it's a little lower or higher depending on the strength of your roster. But if you're just saying, let's make it 75%, right there, you're really only making about 40 to 50 meaningful lineup decisions a season in a 17-week season. That's 2 a week, 2 to 3 a week. Nailing those is why roster construction is so important. It's why giving yourself the best chance to succeed based on what my bench looks like and what my lineup looks like, and based on the format, it's so huge, because that's what wins or loses your league. Of course, you can have the best roster or the worst roster. Macro ideas like that can determine whether you even have a chance to win or lose. But let's just assume you have a chance to win. Those 2 or 3 decisions a week are truly where wins and losses are tallied. So let's look at the draft pick per game more. Looks a little different here. You can see I put the trend line in there. That's the kind of tough to see trend line that goes across the entire war point graph line. You can see where there's kind of a dip in expectation. If you look at this range right here, right around 1.06 to 110, historically, we actually probably overvalue those picks in terms of what their production can be. But at the same time, like, those are really strong valued picks in most classes. Some classes, they're better than others. But you look historically, a lot of people will go, oh, I can get players that slip in that range, players that people assume have a bad situation. Maybe they fall a little bit. This year, it could be a quarterback falls. It could be the wide receiver 1 might go in this range for a lot of people. But generally speaking, these picks are largely overvalued in terms of WAR per game and what you get from them. Up here, these picks are pretty fair, right? Like at the high end, if you have the 101 through 103, historically, you have a pick that's pretty much a great bet to produce. And that is why when we start getting into the positions, and we're going to do episodes on each position, if you look at this data and you realize how much it hurt for people that took, try to think of some examples. Kenny Pickett had a 102 ADP in Superflex in 2022. Think about how much that hurt when not only did he lose value, not only is he not a quarterback in 2025, most likely, that you can start, but he never gave you anything close to this WAR production. So it was like the trifecta of negative. He didn't give you the production. His value tanked pretty much immediately within a season. And he has no long-term value where you can sell him for almost anything. Maybe if he starts for the Browns, you could sell him for a third. But he's probably been an asset that's been traveled, dropped, traded, etc. So you can see when you whiff at the top, how much that hurts. And then also when you get a player that ends up producing at the top of the class later, so 2020, think CeeDee Lamb, thinks Justin Jefferson. Those guys went behind all of the running backs in 2020. Think about how much you've gotten from those guys relative to what you paid. So it's kind of interesting to look at this. I'm going to end the show here just because I want to save each position for its own episode. But just look at this trend graph again. Kind of look at this zoom in, really get an idea of, and again, this is over a 5-year period. Every draft class is different. Part 1, I kind of talked through how the 2025 class is a little bit different than the past with how many running backs are getting pumped up as potentially going day 2, the weakness at the receiver class, the weakness at the quarterback class. Like, this looks a little different, especially if you're a league, and we're just going to focus on the roster construction format. But if you're in like a point per carry league, this is a great class. This is a great class to just hammer running backs in this range. And then obviously when you get to some of the running back position war, you'll see why it makes sense for that class even more so this year to do it in later rounds. But just kind of look at this and look at maybe where these pick values are a little bit underrated based on this year's class, and then maybe based on what you remember from previous drafts. But I'll leave this here. We're going to do a deep dive into each position. I don't know if I'm going to combine those into maybe 2 episodes or do each position by itself. I think you can honestly, if you listen to my roster construction series that I did on DD Radio at the end of 2024, it's kind of going to be that, but you're going to see some visuals to really see how it makes sense across this format and across the 2025 rookie draft picks. So with that, if you haven't already liked and subscribed to the channel, please do so. Hit me up in the comments. More parts coming to this. Again, this is what I love talking about. It's perfect timing because we have this kind of dead period between free agency and the NFL draft. It's going to be perfect for this series for you to really go through your leagues, figure out what picks you have, look at the war, and just take some of this data. Again, it's just based on this format, but you can loosely apply it to your leagues regardless of the scoring, regardless of the settings. We'll talk through that when we go through each position. ddfantasyfootball.com is where you can get the war tool so you can run the war for your leagues itself. Promo code in the description, 50% off for the first week. And I will be back next week with another episode about positions for 2025. Be chill.